Ever feel like different generations just don't get each other? Certified coach, licensed therapist, and speaker Tess Brigham tackles the generational challenges shaping our personal and professional lives on The Gen Mess with Tess.
Hello, and welcome to The Gen Mess with Tess, where we're not just fixing the mess, we're figuring out how to live in it. I'm your host, Tess Brigham. So let's start making sense of the mess together. So today I'm talking to Amy Leneker, founder and CEO of the Center for Joyful Work, who has helped more than 100,000 leaders and teams, including Fortune 100 companies, lead with less stress and more joy. A recovering workaholic who burned out twice before finding a better way, Amy brings 25 years of leadership experience, including a decade in the C-suite. She studied leadership at Yale, neuroscience at the Neuro Leadership Institute, and stress resilience at Harvard Medical School. She is also the author of Cheers to Monday, a science-backed and deeply personal guide to creating more joy and less stress at work. So if you've ever woken up on a Monday already exhausted, this conversation is for you. Hello, Amy.
Thank you for having me. It's so good to be here.
Yes. So I want to talk a little bit about your own story, because I know that I saw that you worked for the state of Washington for over 22, 20, 25, 20 some odd years. But I would love to hear a little bit about, like, was there an aha moment for you when you're like, God, there's got to be a better way?
I wish it was that simple. I wish that I'd had this insight that there was a better way, and there wasn't. What happened is I burned out so terribly that my body just shut down and I got really, really sick. So if there were an aha moment, that would probably have been it, where my body just said, okay, enough is enough. We can't do this anymore.
Mm-hmm. Wow. But you said you had two burnouts.
I did.
Was this the first one we were talking about?
I know. You would think one would be enough. You would think, okay, she burned out one time. That's never going to happen again. But here's the mistake that I made. I thought, well, if I just leave the job, then I'm not going to burn out again.
Mm-hmm.
If I leave this stressful work environment, then I'm going to be burnout proof. But the problem is I took myself when I left the job. I didn't leave myself there. And so within just a few years, I had repeated that exact same pattern.
Yeah.
And that's when I knew I have got to get to the bottom of this. Otherwise, this is going to be my life forever. I'm going to burn out, recover. And that is not how I wanted to spend the rest of my career.
Yeah. Well, you bring up such an interesting point, because this is what I see a lot with the clients that I work with, which is, you have this identity of being the hardworking, the one that puts everything in, the glue, that, however you see yourself. And you're absolutely right. Wherever you go, there you are. And we think if we change, right, we change cities and partners and all this other kind of stuff, that we will change, but we don't. So how do you get past that? How do when your identity is so tied into being the first one there, last one to leave?
I think you just hit the nail on the head, which is we have to figure out, why is that? So for me, I call that your stress story. We all have stress stories. We have these stories that are driving our behavior, sometimes outside of our own awareness. So what is it that you believe about stress? What have you been taught about stress? And I had to really confront, for me, that stress was something I had never thought of work without stress. I hadn't really thought about you could work in a way that was stress-free. So I had to untangle that. And the really hard thing, and I know that this happens for so many people, is that the very behaviors that are causing you stress, the very behaviors that are putting you most at risk for burnout, your workplace is applauding. You are getting kudos and promotions and recognition. And so there's this really difficult temptation to keep doing these things, even though they're having a tremendous impact on you personally.
Yeah. Well, and do you see this? Because I know you've given something like 250 keynote speeches, and I see this too, where I'll go into a company and they'll have me talk about, lunch and learn, stress, burnout, whatever it is. And you'll get there and you're like, there's no executives here. Like, everybody's, and then inevitably you tell people, like, this is what you need to do. And inevitably I'll get someone who will come up to me, either ask me a question or come up to me, and say exactly that, which is, this person over here is working 24/7 and they're getting promoted, and I set some boundaries, and this is the problem. And so I guess I'm curious about what do you say to those C-suite people? Like, because us coming in at this one level, it's helpful. It's good. I'm glad the company's doing it, but it feels a little bit like a Band-Aid.
It is a Band-Aid. And that's why I'm always surprised when they keep inviting me back, because I say things like that. And we know from the research that one-off trainings aren't that helpful.
Yeah.
So yes, I will absolutely show up for an hour. I'll give you everything that I've got. And there isn't going to be that much of a needle mover from me coming in for an hour. So what I try to do, especially with executives, is show them the data that we have to say, here's what does make meaningful change. And you've got to be a part of it. It has to start with you.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's impossible to create real lasting change. But they keep inviting me back. So I'm just going to keep on sharing the hard truths and hope for the best.
Yeah. Well, apparently, I think that people consciously, unconsciously, everyone knows this and knows and understands a little bit. Like we're all aware on this different level of what's happening here. And I think this is my theory, which is that I think for the C-suites, they're sort of stuck in the same cycle. Like, because that's how they became C-suites. Because, I think that for them, it's like, then I have to remove my identity. And so for them to do that, and you're absolutely right. There was a lot of, when you get praised and when there are, good things have come, you're now in the C-suite, you achieve the things that you wanted to achieve. So it's very hard to believe, oh, that formula isn't going to work, isn't working or shouldn't. Yeah. So what do you think the future of leadership needs to be, I guess, requires, for us to stop doing this, to stop being so stressed out?
I don't think my answer will surprise you, given that I have an organization called the Center for Joyful Work. So the way I would answer that is that the future has got to include joy. And here's why. I just wrapped a national research study, a national workforce study on stress and joy at work. And here's what I found. 79% of working Americans say, I need joy at work in order to do my best work. That number jumps to 89% for executives.
Wow.
Isn't that fascinating?
That's
89%
fascinating.
of executives say, I have got to have joy at work in order to do my best work. And yet 57% of people say, I don't feel anywhere close to the amount of joy I want to feel at work. So it has been shown it has a direct impact on performance. It has a direct impact on retention. It has a direct impact on whether or not people are even willing to lead. Our studies showed really frightening data in terms of people saying 63%, almost 3/4 of people said, I'm thinking of leaving my career entirely because of stress.
Wow.
I don't want to do this anymore. And then you look at the leadership pipeline and it is shrinking. The number of people who say, I don't want to manage other people. I'm not willing to be in a leadership role. So to answer your question, if we don't figure this out, if we don't create a new way to lead, we're going to end up with no one in those roles. Because the newer generations are saying thank you, but no thank you.
Well, that leads me perfectly into talking about the generation. So I see this, I always say that millennials are incredibly productive. They love productivity. They are the ones that are all the productivity apps. And a lot of it is, because they came into the workforce during a time when suddenly you could work anywhere, at any time. And there's a lot of benefits to that in its own ways. But there's the biggest downfall that I saw was that my clients did not know how to set boundaries at work. I'm a Gen Xer, so we had natural boundaries, like it ends, workday ends. You didn't have a computer at home. No, what are you going to do? So, your boss couldn't get a hold of you. So you did have that natural understanding of kind of what you need and what made sense. And so we have this whole generation that started in the workforce at a time where you could work 24/7. And then we see this really huge push from Gen Z of sort of watching everything and seeing everything and being like, okay, no, thank you. I don't want any of that. But I'm curious about what you see in your work. Do you feel like what I'm saying is accurate? Is that what you're seeing? And I would love to dig into this Gen Z and sort of what work is, how they're approaching work.
Yes, on all accounts. So yes, it's what I'm seeing anecdotally when I go into organizations. And yes, it's also what our study just found this year in terms of how younger generations are approaching work. And one of the most striking results for me showed that younger generations experience not only more stress at work, but they're impacted more negatively by it. So there's this double whammy that's happening. So it's not just that we say, okay, younger generations are having more stress at work. We also have to understand that the stress they are feeling, it has more of a negative and lasting impact on them than it does for older generations. So it starts to make sense why we so often are talking past each other when we talk about issues of stress. You'll hear older, and I hear this all the time when I go into organizations where folks will say things like, just figure it out. It's not that hard. We're all adults here. That completely misses the boat. You're completely missing the fact that this isn't about someone figuring it out. This is about both the quantity and the impact of stress that they're having. So what you shared, I see it with my own eyes and I see it in the data.
Yeah. So, and I often say that Gen Z has helped me tremendously look at work differently and approach things differently. But I do always ask I'm always asking this bigger question, which is their approach the right approach? Right? They're setting very firm boundaries and again, they're young, right? Like there is something, they don't have all the facts. And so for us to assume that their way is the perfect way or the right way would be naive. And at the same time, I do think that what they're doing and what they're saying is important. Like I think we need to listen to them. So I'm just curious about what you think. Do you think Gen Z gets it?
I think there's a lot that we can learn from them. And I think when you look at not only how they experience stress, but what they say brings them joy, and in terms of what keeps them from feeling joy, and then you start to see that they're making decisions based on that. So when you look, the majority of them say, I believe that leadership's going to require more stress of me. I'm choosing not to do it. That makes sense to me. The problem is, what does that mean for them in terms of their career? So I know for me, especially in the early season of my career, promotions meant a big deal. They meant career advancement.
Yeah.
They meant more money. They meant, so what does that mean? And I think that's a bigger organizational conversation that we need to be having. And that's what worries me so much about the leadership pipeline is what is it that we're creating? Who is going to be willing and equipped to step into those roles and do it in a way that's healthy and productive? We can fill a leadership pipeline, but if it's not full of really good leadership, we've set ourselves up to fail miserably.
So do you feel like they are redefining ambition, about what ambition means? Or
I think in some ways, one of the questions that we asked was, does your stress make your success at work feel less successful? Because it was
that's a great question
that I had, because I knew it did for me. I knew that I had, by the time I burned out and how we started this episode together, I was wildly successful on paper and I had never been more miserable in my own life. So I wanted to find out, is that true for other people too? And I didn't see a big difference by generation. I didn't see in the data. Where I saw the difference was in how you worked. So we saw a huge difference for hybrid folks who said, yeah, stress is making me feel less successful. But I didn't see that in terms of the generational data. So I'm curious about that. I need to dig in more and find out, well, why is that? And how does that line up with how Gen Z is thinking about work?
Yeah. And I think what's hard for Gen Z is that they are figuring it out. Like they are figuring out, like they're at this point in their lives where they're trying to figure out what work means to them and the role it's going to play. And, I'm always saying, but it's interesting when we talk about this idea of success and ambition, because I remember 15 years ago giving this talk, and this millennial at the time, I'm sure he's probably 40 now. And at the time asking me, his professor sent him to my talk. And he told me to, the professor wanted me to ask you, what's the number one thing that young people need to know? And I said, honestly, I think it's figuring out what success means to you.
Yes.
And I guess I often think about is it still that? Is it still like what success means to you? And I think that one thing that's very interesting about the generations is, and it occurred to me, I was like, oh, wait a second, we all have different definitions of success.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the biggest things that creates tension in the workplace with different generations is how do you define being a successful career or being a good coworker?
Yeah.
Good boss? Good, right?
I could not agree more. And I think that where we get stuck is where we start to overgeneralize or we start to assume what we think success looks like for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for me, my definition evolved.
Oh, yeah.
What felt, and I see you nodding to it. It's such a normal experience. Of what felt like success for me when I was a 29-year-old, very different than 39, very different than 49. And I don't know that I don't believe we talk about that enough at work. I don't believe we take the time to reflect in our own lives to say, what does success look like for me right now?
Mm-hmm.
And then I know for me, that's how I found myself in this completely out of balanced way where I felt wildly successful in one area of my life and completely failing in another.
Mm-hmm.
So I love what you're saying. I think we have to do it and we have to do it more. What does success look like? What does it feel like?
Yeah.
One thing I can share from the data without a close second was that the number one thing that brings people joy at work is when there's meaning and purpose in what they do. And so when I think about your question of success, part of that would be, well, what's the meaning and the purpose? Is it here? Are you finding that? So I think that's a really interesting question.
Well, actually, and this brings me back to something I've been meaning to ask for the last 5 minutes, which is how do you define joy?
I define it based on my research. So what I found is that when we look at joy at work, there are 3 conditions that create it. So you can feel joy at work if you just have one of these. Mm-hmm. You're more likely to feel it if you've got 2. And if you've got all 3, you have set yourself up for a whole lot of joy. Mm-hmm. So the first one is when there is meaning and purpose in what you do. Mm-hmm. You can say, I know that there's a why of why I'm here. Mm-hmm. The second is when there's mattering in your relationships. That you matter to your manager, you matter to your coworkers, and not just because of what you produce, but you matter because of who you are. Mm-hmm. And then the third is when there's momentum in your progress. You can look back and say, I've been here for a year, and here's the difference that I've made. Mm-hmm. So if there is meaning and mattering and momentum, that is the trifecta of creating joy at work.
Okay. Meaning, matter. Wait, say it again. Meaning,
mattering, and
momentum. Okay, that's good too.
And what's so fun is when I coach leaders and we start to break down these 3 parts of joy, they'll have these aha moments, and for so many of them, they'll think about moments of joy that were just about mattering. They went on a coffee date, or they laughed in the elevator, or just these little moments of connection through the day. Yeah. And then other folks are drawn more to the meaning side, that they feel like I'm doing this because this is why I'm supposed to be doing this work. But when you start to understand the 3 components of joy, you can start to really figure out how to create more of it.
Yeah. I talk a lot about, because, for a while, right, the big sentiment was, it was all about passion, right? Follow your passion, follow your passion. And I remember that era, and I remember sort of looking into it and thinking, and okay, maybe is it this? And it really it hit me, which it hit a lot of people, which is like, passion's fleeting. Like, how can you keep telling people? And I'm thinking about my own passions and my own things that I'm interested in. I'm like, do I really want to do that all day long? And so what I really pivoted to talking to my clients about, like, finding meaning. What's the meaning behind it? And I said, meaning will always get you up in the morning. Like, listen, am I passionate about the work that I do every goddamn day? No. Like, some days I want to sleep in. But for the most part, but every single day, I know there's meaning behind it. I know it matters. Yep. But the mattering thing is so interesting, because I think a lot of times we see that as recognition. Mm-hmm. And this was another thing with my millennial clients a million years ago that I thought was so interesting, was how many of them needed that recognition, and how many of their bosses were like, "What? You want to thank you? That's what the paycheck's for, right?" That the infamous Mad Men scene, right? Right. And it was. But I think that when I think about millennials, I really think that they not all of them, but many of them grew up in a world where social media was a big part of their lives.
Yeah.
Social media didn't come into my life until I was an adult. I had a kid, So they grew up with social media, and that's a very collective, right? It's a collective thing. It's a group thing.
Yeah.
And so this idea of recognition is really important. And it just made me think about how, I did appreciate being told thank you, but I didn't expect it because I didn't feel this collective, because I was taught to just shut up and keep going. And, and I know millennials, they ruffled a lot of feathers, and I'm like,
And I so appreciate the work that you do in sort of debunking what many people believe versus what's true. Because what you're describing, this idea of I need to feel like I am appreciated for what I do, it was the number 2 blocker of joy at work.
Wow.
The number 2. So only behind when there's an overwhelming workload. So that was the biggest one. Is I've got too much work. I can't do it all. That was the number 1.
Yeah.
But right behind that is exactly what you just said. I feel underappreciated for who I am. I feel underappreciated for my contributions. And when we looked at how it spread out, it was actually the Gen Z folks that felt it the most. So those folks who are 18 to 29 were the ones most likely to say, when I feel underappreciated, I can't feel joy at work. So even that insight. So if you're a manager or a leader or even a coworker with Gen Z colleagues, it's worth having that conversation. Yeah. So not about assuming, oh, here's this data, so go off and do these things. But I think it's about the conversation of saying to another person, what does make you feel appreciated? What does bring you joy at work? So using them as conversation starters instead of a to-do list, I think is how we can create better workplaces.
So what's the resistance that you get from, because I've given a lot of these talks and I've even been yelled at by people.
Me too.
There's always at least one person at every generational talk that I give that wants to know why. And again, they're usually a baby boomer, always a baby boomer, which I think is ironic. But why don't young people want to work today? Why don't they care? Why don't they? So what do you say to those executives? And it's usually an executive, right?
Yes.
Who are like, why do I have to coddle them? Like, ask them about their days, care about their weekends.
Yes. And what I say back is you don't. Because I get asked the same question. Why do I have to appreciate people? Why do I have to care about the people I work with? And I say, you don't. You're also not going to get them to stay. And you're not going to get them to give you everything you want. And you're not going to get the kind of outcomes that you're looking for. So do you have to do it? Absolutely not. Is there clear reasons why you want to do it? Yes. But ultimately, you get to choose. And I think the questions that you've been asked, they're the same ones that I get asked all the time. And even the way the question is asked shows us how much they're missing the boat. Because we can't assume that that's true. So anything I can do to encourage organizations to be curious about what's happening. Let's not make assumptions. Let's not pretend like we know. Let's not extrapolate my one experience with this individual to 5,000 individuals. So can we build in time to be curious and really understand? And that to me is the game changer. Can we get people to be in conversation instead of judgment?
Yes.
It's a bad place to start. And I'm sorry that you were yelled at. I heard you say that, and I'm sorry that happened. It's happened to me too, and it's not okay.
Yeah. No,
it's not okay. But
it's not. And I know today I work very hard. I'm just me. And so I have contractors that work for me, but I work very hard to be very mindful of saying thank you and appreciating. And no, we're not going to schedule a meeting at that time. That's 9:00 at night for you. No. Why are you saying yes to me? I just looked up the time difference.
Yes.
And all of that. But that takes, that's me at 52 years of being a therapist and to have that, ability. And, I look at my sister, she's an attorney, and she doesn't need all of that. She doesn't need someone to that's how she operates. Right. So in her mind, she's thinking what's going on? And I think that's a big piece of that we also have to be empathetic of the people that are having to make these changes, because again, we grew up with a certain mindset. We were told how to be in the world. That's our identity. And I definitely think Gen X, we love our identity. We really hold on to it. And so I think that's the other part of it too, is I love talking about the generations because it's a framework, but it's a framework for everyone to kind of be a little bit more understanding and curious about each other.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
I could not agree more. I think if we think of a framework in that way, it's only going to serve us well. Where we get in trouble is where we do the things that you and I have both seen organizations do in terms of stereotyping and judging and criticizing. But to use it as a tool to understand that's about as good as it gets.
Yeah.
If I get an organization that wants to partner with me in that way, I'm all in. I'm all in helping you understand what's really happening here.
So I'm thinking about the beginning of our conversation. So I'm curious, how did you get from, because you work for the state of Washington, it was public policy.
Yes.
Okay. And so how did you burn out a couple times, you get to this point. So why doing this? What was the impetus to do this work?
I love this question because it was an executive coach who gave me what seemed like a really simple assignment. So I had an executive coach and he told me that for the next 30 days, I was supposed to track my energy and engagement level at the top of every hour.
Yes, I do this with my clients too, but I don't do 30 days. This one's tough. I tell them, I say, you have to do at least 3 days during the week.
3 would have been better. Yeah.
3 days during the week and then a day on the weekend. Like I want to see a compare and contrast a little bit of what work is and that, but it's every hour. What did you do and how did you feel about it? And then, yes. So go on. Yeah.
I love this exercise. To do that for 30 days.
Okay.
So I meet with him and it was clear as day that whenever I was doing work related to policy and legislation, my energy tanked. When I was doing work where I was training or facilitating or coaching, my energy was through the roof. Now, normally this wouldn't be a problem, except my job was policy and legislation. So I realized I'm in the wrong job. It wasn't just the stress. I needed to pivot. So even while working for the state, I did shift careers and I did leadership development for a few years where I helped create a leadership program for all managers in the state of Washington, which was wildly rewarding. But what really led to that career driver was the executive coach saying, "Are you paying attention?" And just like it sounds like with your clients, many of us aren't. I was just doing what I thought I had to do.
Yeah. So
that's really what drove the change was that assignment from a very wise executive coach.
Yes. No. And I think it is, I've found over the years too, with that exercise, what's really helpful about it as well, just there are obviously these big aha moments, but sometimes people figure out like, wait a second, I realized that I have this meeting that stresses me out and I scheduled it 4:00 every week. And you know what, and then I decided to schedule it. And I realized that when I was, did it at 9 and I just ripped off the Band-Aid. It's great. And the rest of my day is great. So sometimes, it is this, it's really about awareness, like just kind of, being aware of what are you doing and how do you feel about it? Because that's everything, right? Yeah. Like all of work, all of life, the person that you're with, all of it, where you live, it's how you perceive it, how you feel about it.
I agree. And I found, and I wonder if you find this too, is that the more stressed I was, the less autonomy I felt. So I did have agency. I could move a meeting from 4:00 to 8:00 if that was going to be better. But when you're in the thick of it, when you're so stressed out and you're just moving at the speed of light, it's hard to take that step back. It's hard to look at what would make it better. And so I was so grateful for the exercise because just that, the being able to step back on the balcony and look down at what's happening. And suddenly there were all of these things that had been right in front of my face and I just hadn't seen them.
Yeah. And you mentioned in your study that the number one is the overwhelm, right? Too much work on your plate. And that makes complete sense because really, I hear this all the time from people. I'm overwhelmed. When you are in overwhelm, you can't think about anything else. And that's the other part of it too, is I think that there is a lot of pressure in the world today to not only, right, be the best and be the star and do all that, but also have this sort of balanced life and be healthy about everything. And so there's this added stress and guilt for people who are overwhelmed and can't cope with anything to also be like, because if you are a manager, you have to be aware. And I think that's one thing that people don't recognize about overwhelm is it really does shut everything down in your head.
It does. And it's so sad in some ways that it does that, because when we don't recognize that, we start to make up stories about people.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Tess just doesn't care. Oh, Tess just isn't tracking what's happening. Tess, she just doesn't have what it takes. Well, none of that's true. It's that we've created a condition where someone isn't able to do their best work.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find so interesting is how stress and joy don't just stay in the workplace. Mm-hmm. How we're doing during the day, we carry that home with us. It comes into our families and in our communities. And so when we're feeling overwhelmed at work, of course, that's going to translate and trickle into the rest of our lives too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is so, and for a lot of people, when you're in that place in your life where you are the executive and you've just gotten promoted, your kids are young. Yes. I was chatting with someone yesterday, actually, who has 3 young kids, and he's got the same issue where he's got a kid. It's like, I want to watch my kids play hockey, but I can't because I'm running over here. And then he's in this weird place of, I'm trying to provide for my family and provide the money it takes to pay for hockey.
Of course.
And so, but my kids are seeing me stressed out all the time. So it's that back and forth of, and I really feel for people because it shouldn't be that way as a parent. You shouldn't have to be like, either my kids eat or they see me.
Yes. And exactly. And I think it really begs the question then about how we're set up as systems.
Yes.
This isn't an individual failure. So that leader that you're talking about, this isn't a problem that he created. This isn't a lack of something or a lack of planning on his part.
Mm-hmm.
This is the way that we've set up the systems of work. And it's really setting us up to fail. Yeah. There's no question. For a large part of my career, I thought that I had figured it out. I thought that I had cracked the code because I wanted to be a present mom. I wanted to be there. So I would work at the speed of light through the day. I don't have time for water coolers. I don't have time for lunches because every minute I'm doing that is a minute I've got to stay longer.
Mm-hmm.
So I would work at the speed of light to get out of work at a reasonable time. And I would, which was very rare to be a director of legislation and walk out of the door at 4:30 or 5, but I did it a lot. So what would happen is I would pick up the kids. We would do dinner and soccer and stories and all the things. And then once they were finally asleep, that's when I would log back on.
Mm.
So that's when I did email. That's when I planned for the next day. That's when I would do the hours of work that I wasn't willing to do while they were still awake. So while it felt like I'd cracked the code, I hadn't cracked it at all. I was just setting myself up to burnout in a horrible way.
Yeah.
We're not designed to be on email at 1:00 in the morning. That we're really not. That's not how we are meant to live. I strongly believe that.
Well, and my guess would be at that time, you're probably getting a lot of praise from the outside, right? Because what do people see? What, Amy is a super mom, running this huge job, and then she's with her kids and she's present, and look how great she is, and and I think that's one of the social media pieces that has made it really hard for us, because we have started to create this idea of like, what should my life look like, and how do I project that out into the world? But I can imagine, I'm sure you were praised by people when they, your life.
Absolutely. And the financial rewards meant a lot to me. I grew up in a house with a lot of love and never enough money.
Mm-hmm.
So every day I was aware of that I'm loved beyond belief and there's never going to be enough money. Mm-hmm. So the financial reward meant a lot to me. It wasn't about being able to buy something new and different. It was about being able to say, wow, I can create a life without that financial fear. Mm-hmm. I can create a life without worrying every day if I'm going to be able to pay the bills. So it created this really vicious cycle, this self-fulfilling prophecy where at what point is enough? Mm-hmm. At what point, and it wasn't about a number. There was never going to be a number that made me feel secure, because it was about this internal story that I had carried my entire life from having lived in a place of fear around it.
Yeah. Oh, I have so many questions and they're all coming at me at once, but I want to keep going. So I'm curious about how, and this is my concern and my fear, which is, and my fear of the fact that our system will never change, because we've got people at the tippy top that are really benefiting from all of this. And they're the ones that make the changes. I mean, the reality is a company that you're only as good as your CEO. And if your CEO is crazy or a tyrant or any of these other things, no, this isn't going to be, nothing's going to change. And what I see a lot of with Gen Z, especially, is many of them are just like, well, okay, fine, then I'll just be my own boss. I'll do my own thing. And it does make me wonder, do we have to have the collapse of these CEOs of these big companies for this to change? And I am also curious about, like, when you do talk to the C-suite, is there anyone a CEO that ever goes, oh, okay, maybe I should lower my salary so that people would have more time? Because the reason why people are overwhelmed is they're doing 10 people's jobs because they eliminated the jobs because the CEO makes 150 times what everyone else makes.
Yes. I have never yet met one who suggested their salary be lower. I would love to. If they're listening, please reach out, because Tess and I want to work with you.
Yeah.
I haven't heard it yet, but I couldn't agree with you more. I think that we've created this condition where it's really hard to be successful. So what does that mean? Can I stay here?
Yeah.
Can I stay in this organization and have the life that I want to have? Or do I need to separate and do something different? And I do see a generational difference. I think, at least for me, and I wonder, because you and I are about the same age, we saw people give their entire lives, their entire loyalty to a career or a company, and have it all fall apart. So it's really shifting. And I think there is this sense of, if I'm going to report to someone, I'm going to report to myself. So I do see it. I think there is an entrepreneurial effect that is out there for sure. And I'm seeing it, frankly, with my peer group too. I'm seeing some folks in our age group who are like, I'm kind of done. I've sort of had it. I'm going to finish out my career in a different way. Yeah.
I definitely think things, I do know that once I turn 50, things really do. That's why I try to tell my young clients, like, listen, it will get better. I promise you. I promise you. Like, every zero at the end of an age, it feels momentous and it feels scary. But then you get there and it's not as bad as you think. But, and I do think there is something about that Gen Xers, we're now like late 40s, to 60 now. And that we're in this point in our lives where we're like, why am I doing all this? Why do I, and I think it's taken us a bit longer, I think, because we were stuck in between that. Because what I saw with my parents was they picked professions and then they did those, they were service, father, a lawyer, mom, teacher, service. My sister's a lawyer. I'm a therapist. Like, we all have these, get master's degrees and have a service. And then I also saw how, my grandfather worked his way up in a company till he was vice president. Then he retired at 61. He was dead by 70. And I saw him sort of, but he was the classic age at that time. Like, that's what work was that he started the executive program and he worked his way up, and then, he retires, and then you're gone, and you have this huge pension that is, supposed to help you and support you. And so I also witnessed that, and I saw that, and it was like, and it's just this realization of, I think for a lot of us, of like, oh, I realized this a long time ago, but those days are gone. That kind of security is gone. And I think that's really important for people to recognize, is for those generations, the greatest generation, the silent generation, for them, there was a payoff. There really was. And so the purpose and all these things that we're talking about, there was. And so I guess I just don't understand why executives don't quite get that. Like, don't see that, because I'll get this question a lot too. I'm sure you've gotten it too, where at the end of these generation talks, someone will be like, well, we have a job in our company that we can't fill. And we've tried to fill it, and we've tried to fill it, and we've tried to fill it. And again, they're thinking that the problem, what's wrong with these young people that they don't want this job? And what it was that it was a job where it was a lot, it was an insurance company, and there was one that was a lot more hours. It was more of a career-y kind of job, a lot more hours, but the money wasn't as good. And you were going to have to be on call, and the upside in the future was better. But there was this other job that was very 9 to 5 and paid about the same. And that's what people were taking. And I'm like, well, so why is this so difficult for people to see?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It does give me hope. I think so much of the way that that Gen Z in particular, this trend-setting, change agent spirit, I think is really inspiring. I think about my own son who's in that group, and I almost learned from him more than he learns from me.
Yeah,
He's
absolutely.
got this incredibly healthy approach to life. And I think, where did that come from? Hopefully I was a small part of it. And what you were saying before, it made me think of something we haven't talked about yet, but I think it's a big piece of this conversation is AI.
Yes.
I just read a wild article yesterday in the Atlantic about the economy could completely change, and what happens when more of these white collar positions go away. And it's a really fascinating, not even a wrinkle, it's bigger than a wrinkle, but it's a fascinating layer to this conversation around what is work going to look like and what role are all the generations going to play in it.
Do you think, this is my personal theory, all of these are just my theories of things that I witness and see, but my theory is that AI is going to force us back into critical thinking. Because we've moved.
Tell me more. I think you might be right.
We've moved away from critical thinking very much so. In our culture. And this is just for my own limited, I use ChatGPT, and it is very helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredibly helpful. And I had to get my AI person to get to know me and understand me. And, you got to check. But for the most part, I find it incredibly helpful. And what I find that it challenges me on is, because I feel guilty sometimes, because I'm like, should I be writing every single word of this? But what I'm realizing as I'm doing this, as I'm speaking, is that ChatGPT allows me to take all of my knowledge and all these crazy thoughts that I have, as you can hear in this interview, these ideas and thoughts, and I can put them into this computer, into this bot, and it will spit it back out, and it sounds like me, and it feels like me, and it's what I want to say, and the sentences are okay, good, great, they're formed well, and I'm making my point, and I might change a few things. But I think for me, that's what ChatGPT has done for me, is it's allowed me to stop having to go okay, let me pull some information over here and research this article and do this and that. And it's allowed me to just sit in front of my computer and go, what are these crazy ideas? I'm having all these thoughts, and then I had this thought, and then this thought, and then this thought. What do you think? And I think that's the critical thinking that we really got in college, right? That we got for ourselves. That isn't as isn't talked about enough. Yeah, that's just my thought. This is what I hear from professors who are teaching young people right now, and how challenging it is.
Right, and I'm a policy analyst by trade, so this idea of critical thinking was sort of the bread and butter of my work. And I did teach in graduate school. I taught at a graduate level for 8 years. And I often think I'm glad that I was there before this AI revolution, because I think we've made it really hard in higher ed. But I ran an experiment just yesterday. So I did some qualitative and quantitative data gathering for an organization that I'm working with. And so I thought, I'm going to do the process I normally do. So I'm going to go old school. I'm going to code the data the way I usually do. I'm going to pull out the themes of what I think is there. And then I'm just going to take all of the raw data. I'm going to throw it in ChatGPT, and I'm going to see what it says. And I will tell you, it was almost identical. So, and I took about 6 hours, maybe 7.5 hours, to really go through all the data, to pull out the themes. And like you were saying, it took less than, 10 seconds. And it literally pulled out the half a dozen themes that I saw. Some of the recommendations were a little bit different.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point, that's the critical thinking piece, is that if you don't understand the context of the organization, you're not going to make quality recommendations. But just to have that first layer of support of, here's pages and pages of information, and here's what we see, phenomenal.
Yes. So, and what I hear from, I had someone, Liz Helton, who specializes in working with young people in their careers. And what she was talking about with AI was it's part of our lives, and it's really about learning how to use it.
Yes, exactly.
That's what organizations need. They need people that understand how to use AI. They don't necessarily need to understand the company. Yes. You've got people there that understand the company, but together like
Yes.
together, this is, I think, the formula is, and I think even if you're an older worker, you don't have to be, that absolutely is what you should be doing, for you to pretend like it's not happening. And I just have to laugh because it's just like the internet.
Isn't it? Because we were there for that too.
We're just here for haven't we already been through this? Why is everyone panicking? Like the robots aren't going to take over. Don't worry.
I think there's an opportunity too to help us reimagine work. So here's a great example. Just this week, I was doing a prep meeting because I'm going to be delivering a conference in just a couple weeks. And one of the things they shared is that they believe a large number of their managers and leaders used AI to write their last round of performance reviews for their teams. So I thought, well, is that the problem? Is the problem that you think they used AI, or is the problem that you've created such a cumbersome process to do a performance review that people are defaulting to this other tool? So to me, I think it all goes back to curiosity. Can we just take a step back and say, what are we trying to do? Is this helping us get there? And if not, then can we hit the pause button? Can we do something different?
Well, the other thing too is that when I think about those people that were inputting everything into chat, into whatever they were using, my guess would be they were like, Amy's awesome. I can count on her for all of these cool things that she does, and and it spits out,
and then
something far more intelligent than Amy's awesome, right? But I do think, that sentiment of what was in there had to come from somewhere.
Yes.
So it is rooted in truth. It's just we get to be sticklers if you're not writing every single word.
Yeah, that's right.
In the last few minutes, I do, because I realize we haven't even talked about your new book.
I can't believe time is going by so fast.
I know. So March 24th, you can pre-order Amy's book, Cheers to Monday. So let's talk about what does Cheers to Monday actually mean?
Oh, I thank you for asking that. Cheers to Monday. It's meant to be this tongue-in-cheek, like, wait, what did she just say? Because whoever says that, how many people walk through work and say, Happy Monday, when we do that so much for Fridays.
Yes.
And I did a quick calculation of math, and the average person works about 90,000 hours in a lifetime, about 90,000, give or take. That equates to 2,109 Mondays. That's a lot. So if you've got people, and I know I have them in my life, who despise Mondays, really don't like Mondays, you've set yourself up to not like 2,109 days of your life.
Yeah.
And why in the world would we do that? So this book is about saying, let's do something different. Let's lead, let's live with less stress and more joy, and see what happens when we do that.
Yeah. So what's one thing you have, like, there's someone out there who wakes up Monday exhausted, not happy.
Yes.
So what's one shift that they can make?
I would encourage them to do the life-changing exercise that executive coach had me do. Track your energy through the day. And here's why. If you are waking up on Monday morning because you're exhausted because you have a toxic boss, or you're exhausted because you go to work and you're disrespected or you're bullied, there's no amount of self-care that's going to take that stress away. Yeah. And so to understand, if I cannot be successful here, I need to be successful somewhere else. The study that we just wrapped showed that 25% of working Americans report feeling bullied at least once a week.
Wow.
A quarter.
That is surprising.
A quarter of working Americans say at least once a week. So if that's happening for you, no wonder you wake up on Monday exhausted. Of course you do. It wouldn't make sense if you didn't. So just to recognize, what is the system you're operating within? Can you be successful and healthy and productive? And if not, then let's start planning your exit strategy. Yeah. Let's start planning how to get you into a place where you can thrive.
Yeah. And that can be so, because if you're already overwhelmed, right? This is the part that is so hard, is if you're already overwhelmed, it's very hard to think clearly and think about that. Yes. But what I love about that, the energy exercise, is you're just tracking, it's not added work. But I often say to people, if you are overwhelmed in that space, if you feel like you can't even think about that, then you got to start taking some things away.
That's right.
You got to start figuring out what do I need to let go of so I can create the space in order to do that. Because that's another part of all of this, is how you kind of get trapped in work. is that you get stuck in the cycle and you can't see your way out. So you don't get out and then you go and go and go and go and go.
Yeah, when I was, excuse me, when I was heading toward the peak of my burnout, my dad gave me a book on rest. And it was such a kind, loving gesture with only good intention. A book this thick about rest. And I thought, I haven't read anything for fun in the last decade of my life. I don't envision myself reading this book on rest. And so it became a plant stand in my office. And every time I walked by it, it was this reminder that I don't even know how to rest. Like I need a book because I can't even relax. So what you're saying is true. Like when we're in it, all of these well-intentioned ideas that people try can backfire. For me, they just caused more shame. And so to really understand, okay, this isn't because you're broken. This isn't because you don't know what you're doing. This is your brain in a threat response. And if you understand that, then you can take some of the pressure off and start activating that part of our brain that does allow us to think a little bit better.
Yeah. No, I love that because that is I think if you're going to talk about burnout, actually the most important thing to know is this is not a failure on your part. This is part of being human.
Exactly.
And how we operate.
Yes.
So, because again, we live in this society where, right, if you are failing in some way, shape, or form, it's your fault.
Yes.
Can't possibly be anybody else's.
So much shame. So when I first wrote my manuscript, I had included in there that the summer I burned out, I had over 100 stress-induced panic attacks.
Wow.
And each time I would edit, that sentence, I just felt so ashamed. I felt so like, God, am I going to put this out in the world? And so each edit, I would soften it. So over 100 became dozens. And then the next round of edits became many. And then I left it out altogether. And then it was literally the very final edit, you've got to turn this in now because this puppy's going to print and you can't change it anymore, that I put the sentence back in. Because I thought, yes, I did have 100 panic attacks. That was part of my burnout story. And it was also part of my healing story. And so to just realize that it doesn't mean we're broken. This is the experience that I had. And actually, it's the sentence I'm most proud of. When I look at the book now, it's the sentence that I think, good for you. Good for you for feeling terrified and fear of judgment and doing it anyway. That's really a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up. So tell everyone where they can find you. Like I said, the book, you can pre-order the book now, but the book is coming out March 24th. So tell us about where else can people find you? Where can they order the book? All that good stuff.
Thank you for asking. So you can find me at amyleneker.com. That's the best way. You can also find our work at the Center for Joyful Work.
Okay, great. And thank you so much for listening to the Gen Mess with Tess. Remember, we're not just fixing the mess, we're learning how to live in it. Stay curious, be kind to yourself, and I'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Gen Mess with Tess with your host, Tess Brigham. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And make sure to follow Tess Brigham on all social channels. To learn more about Tess's books, courses, or to have Tess speak to help clean up the Gen Mess at your organization, head on over to tessbrigham.com. Thanks for listening.